Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Paul Mounts. Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, here's an idea. Press the like and subscribe thing. Press the subscribe button there. Like, leave a thumbs up, even leave a comment. That would be great. I would love to get to 700 subscribers in the next couple of weeks, if that's at all possible. All you have to do is press the subscribe button. You don't have to watch the videos. You could watch the videos, but you don't have to. But just press the subscribe button, because I really got a hankering to get to 700 subscribers, because I know that's pretty small beer in YouTube terms, but it'd be a bit of an achievement for me. I'd be quite pleased to get to 700 subscribers, and who knows where we'd go beyond that. So if you can, press that subscribe button. Right, back to the matter at hand. It's another Doctor Who episode, Dot and Bubble, written by Russell T Davies, directed by Dylan Holmes-Williams, who directed last week's rather peerless 73 Yards. Before I talk about the episode, I just want to talk about the general flow and direction of Doctor Who in this current season. This was ultimately quite a sort of a political episode, I suppose. Russell T Davies certainly compared it to sort of the closest the show has come to Black Mirror, doing this sort of dystopian story about the potential perils of scientific progress, which is a very Black Mirror thing, and Doctor Who's done those sorts of things in the past. And of course we had that extraordinary sort of bold statement at the end of the episode regarding the Doctor himself. And I've seen once again a lot of the online commentary is R.I.P. Doctor Who political woke message. Nobody actually saying what the message is. Lecturing political. It's the same tiring commentary that we hear from people every week, and I don't understand where it's coming from, because Doctor Who's always had a certain political leaning to it, going right back to the very early days. The very first Dalek serial in 1963-64 was all about atomic wars and neutron wars and the perils of nuclear fusion, and it was very much post-World War II, looking back at the recent past and sort of warning where that sort of thing can go. And Doctor Who has always been political, has always had political elements, as it should, because it's science fiction. And one of the things that science fiction is supposed to do is reflect back at us the world we're living in a futuristic or scientific or fantasy concept, and say, well, this is a mirror image of the world we're living in today. What do you think of that? So I can't really understand why people are getting so worked up about it at the moment, because Doctor Who's done all this in the past. In the 70s we had stories wagging fingers about pollution and colonialism, war and all these things, but for some reason people seem to accept it back in the 70s, or maybe they just weren't aware of it and just watched it as a routine science fiction show. What's clear is that Doctor Who is no longer a routine science fiction show. Not only has it now got this vaguely sort of supernatural, fantastical edge that's been brought into the storytelling, it is also now very clearly being used by Russell as a vehicle to put across certain depictions of the world we're living in today in a fantasy setting, which, as I said, is what the best science fiction always does. It reflects back the world we're living in and says, well, look at this. This episode does that more blatantly and pointedly than many episodes. Certainly this year we've had a lot of episodes which have looked at, last week we had dodgy politics, the week before we had capitalism. So Doctor Who's, this season particularly, it's dealing with these issues and presenting them in this way. And it's presenting them in a way which is unavoidable, because these things are there front and centre in the storylines and in the direction of the narratives. And I think that people who are constantly banging on about Doctor Who's message, they're just banging on a drum that's making less and less sound, because it's what Doctor Who is now. And it should be. It should be telling these stories in this way, and I'm glad that it is. One of the things I'm missing from Doctor Who, however, as an oldie, is rubber monsters. If you're a long-time fan, or you're just familiar with the history of the show, you will remember episodes where the Cybermen marched down the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral, where the Daleks glided over Westminster Bridge, sea devils rising up out of the Channel. These images of creatures in familiar surroundings, and I think it was John Pertwee who summed up that particular part of Doctor Who's appeal very well. There's nothing more scary than a yeti on your looing, tooting beck. A slightly tortuous sort of analogy perhaps, but it worked, because monsters on your doorstep. The threat on your doorstep is far more terrifying than the threat on an alien planet or an alien colony. And yes, I miss those simplistic Earth invasion stories that we've had in the past. But I don't think Russell T Davies is interested in telling those stories anymore. I think he's interested in telling stories that are more profound and a bit deeper than rampaging robots and lizard creatures and aliens in pepper pots. I mean, we'll see the Daleks again and the Cybermen, I'm sure. But at the moment, he's more interested in getting things off his chest, which is what he does. He's done this in all his shows throughout his writing career. And It's a Sin, he was getting the story of the AIDS crisis off his chest. Queer as Folk, he was getting his entire experience as a gay man in Manchester off his chest. He does these things years and years. One of more recent shows is very unsuccessful, but actually rather brilliant BBC series, which has, I think you can see this version of Doctor Who in some of that, particularly in things like 73 Yards, which was the corrupt politician taking the world to the brink of nuclear warfare. Years and Years was all about that sort of paranoia, the modern world paranoia of a world that seems increasingly out of control. Those are the stories he wants to tell now, and I applaud him for that. And I applaud him for being quite blunt about it and saying, look, this is what I'm doing. This is a new look for Doctor Who, and I don't think he would have come back to Doctor Who if he was just repeating what he'd done before. Now, I think there are certain elements of the setups that are familiar. I think the whole Ruby family thing is the sort of family thing that he likes to toy with and have bubbling away in the background. But certainly in terms of the main storylines themselves, they're very, very different. Which finally brings me to talk about Dot and Bubble, last night's episode, which I watched late last night, which is why my review is late coming to you, because I didn't watch it till about midnight. This is an episode I wasn't really looking forward to because the trailer made it look like something sort of futuristic and mechanised, and I think that personally I find it hard to connect with sort of futuristic settings and futuristic spaceships and planets and stuff because it is divorced from reality. But it might not speak to me very, very much, and I don't necessarily demand that my entertainment speaks to me, but I connect more with sort of contemporary weird stories. But I was sort of taunted by these images of these slug creatures, the man traps. There was a lot of on-set footage that leaked at the time when these episodes was being filmed, or this episode particularly was being filmed over a year ago at the new campus at Swansea University with this peculiar slug-like thing devouring people. And I remember looking at these pictures and thinking, that looks a bit, not sure how that looks. But of course you're looking at these things out of context, and when you actually see them in the context of the episode, yeah, it was great to have rubber monsters back in Doctor Who, but they weren't really the point of the story. The story, then, as we know, this is another episode that was actually done very early in the production run of this season, and as we discovered last night from Doctor Who Unleashed, it's actually the very last scene, the very powerful and emotional scene, was the very first thing that Shooter Gatwa filmed making the series. He'd already done his part of The Giggle, then he went off to carry on filming Sex Education, which, as we know, has impacted these two episodes, 73 Yards and this episode, because Shooter Gatwa isn't in them very much. He's in this more than he was in 73 Yards. And I will question the wisdom, perhaps, of having, at this point of the series, 2 episodes without the Doctor in them very much. Now, I think the Doctor's probably established over his first 3 episodes, but to take him out of them or have him not available for 2 seems a bit odd. And it's unfortunate that they had to have 2 Doctor Light episodes in a shortened season, and that is again part of the problem. You've only got 8 episodes to play with. You can't hang around. You've got to get on with it. You've got to tell your stories quickly. You've got to establish your Doctor, and not having him in 2 episodes for the most part leaves just 6 episodes for your new Doctor to make his mark. And again, I think that we have an issue with, there are so many unanswered questions. The mystery of Ruby Sunday herself. Who is Susan Twist's character? Susan Twist, the actress who's appeared in every episode. What's she got to do with anything? Who is Mrs. Flood, Anita Dobson's character, who, as we remember from the Christmas episode, looked at the camera quite pointedly and said, have you never seen the TARDIS before? There's a lot of mysteries being seeded through this series, but only 3 episodes to resolve them all at the end. And I think that's unfortunate with only 8 episodes, that the episodes don't have time to sort of stretch and properly bed in these mysteries. You have to sort of rush through them. Anyway, back to this episode itself. As I said, one I wasn't necessarily looking forward to because of the setting, but this is told from the point of view of a character called, and these are typical sort of bizarre Russell T Davies names, Lindy Pepperbean, played by Callie Cook, who pretty much carries the bulk of the episode. I think she's in every scene, really. She's a computer operative dealing with data process in a future community on a future world, which is called Fine Time. It's a dome city, which is smack in the middle of these huge woods, which appear to be part of the story, but perhaps aren't. And she's connected in a very TikTok, Instagram-y style, permanently to all her friends who come up. There's a dot, which is a little robotic thing which creates a bubble, a virtual reality world in which she exists, basically communicating with other people, working for 2 hours, then partying with people for the rest of the time. It's very much Russell T Davies's take on the vacuity of modern communications for young people, spending all their time online, indulging in these split-second, pocket-sized interactions with one another, but not really having much in the way of human interaction. Of course, the story progresses here that they spend so much time in the dot and bubble world that people can't even walk in a straight line. They have to be given directions in the form of arrows from the dot interface. So it's very much having a little dig at the mentality of people who live that way, who lose the ability to do simple things like communicate on a one-to-one basis, simple ability like moving around and thinking independently, and that's what he's focusing on here. The Doctor and Ruby appear as images on this screen, and they're trying to warn her that there are monsters around who want to eat them and kill them. We see that people are disappearing from this interface. Certain people are suddenly no longer there. The Doctor and Ruby eventually persuade her to switch off the dot, which then disperses the bubble, and she has to see the world as it is. And we see these repulsive, tentacled slug creatures, horrible tentacle things that are devouring people in a quite unpleasant and nasty way. And they're stalking through the streets of this city, just wiping everybody out, but she doesn't realise that because she's plugged into the dot all the time. The Doctor and Ruby know that there's a way out through the conduits which lead to the river that runs underneath the city, and she's basically trying to save her and as many other people as they can in the city from these ravenous creatures. But what's it all got to do with Dot, the AI interface? What's the secret of the homeworld? What's the secret of Lindy's homeworld and her mother, of course played by Susan Twist, who appears on screen briefly? And where's this all leading to in the end? Who can we trust? Do we like these people? Do we like these indolent, soft people who have allowed their brains to atrophy to be slaves to this AI? There's a lot to unpack in this episode, and I thought this was very, very striking episode. Visually it looked great. Again, I think this again is an episode where you can finally see Disney money bleeding through onto the screen, because there was a lot going on here in terms of design of this futuristic community, the visual effects created in the community, obviously replacing the rather bland buildings of Swansea University with futuristic high-tech buildings and walkways and so on, and this CGI that creates this image of lots of these man-trap creatures prowling the streets. Very unnerving, very disturbing creatures, because they look like slugs. They don't communicate as such, but they just devour people. Quite striking for a show that's family friendly and doesn't necessarily go down that body horror route, but that was pretty body horrific, if you like. Ultimately, the characters in this story are deeply unlikable. Lindy Pepperbean, probably the most unlikable of them all. You'll have seen the episode by now, you know why. But she was a vacuous, self-obsessed, self-perpetuating person. She only cared about herself. She didn't really care about the people around her, as we saw from one shocking moment where she did something which, if you weren't sure you liked her, you wouldn't like her after this particular thing. She is fairly typical, I suppose, in a broad way, of a modern mentality of, I'm not having a go at young people, but a certain generation of people who think about themselves to the exclusion of everybody else, and they're so self-obsessed and self-centered. And she became an appalling example of this. So she became deeply, deeply unlikable. And then in the final sequence where the Doctor and Ruby finally appear properly down in these tunnels by this conduit where the TARDIS is, and the survivors are about to set off on this boat to head into these woods. The Doctor knows that way is madness because they're going to die out there. And he offers them the opportunity to come aboard the TARDIS so we can take them somewhere safe. And they won't do it. They won't do it because he is different. He's not one of them. And you will have noticed, I imagine, that the entire supporting cast of the episode were very strikingly white, with bleached hair and exaggerated features and makeup and so on. They're all white. And it turns out that this community is racist, basically. They don't want to go with the Doctor because he doesn't look like them. There's that spine-chilling scene where Lindy looks dismissively at the Doctor and says, it's very kind of you to help me, but then you're obliged to do so, regarding him, his race, as secondary. It was sort of subtly done in that it didn't spell it out in big friendly letters, but it was also unsubtle. It was quite clear that that's what they were saying. You know, we're all white and you're black and you're subservient, you're lesser people. And I think that one of the characters who escapes refers to the TARDIS as voodoo. It's very much the language of the racist in plain sight, using these sort of dismissive terms. And Ncuti Gatwa's reaction to it was perfectly judged. Sort of, you could see in his face the realisation of what this woman and these people were saying and what they were. Despite all that, he still wanted to help them. He's still a better person. He wanted to save these people from the doom that was waiting for them, and frankly that they all deserve. But they didn't want to because he was different to them. And he played it so well, and it was all in his face, in his eyes. You know, I mean, a lot of people have complained that this Doctor is very much in touch with his emotions, because he does weep quite a lot. But here I think he was crying in frustration and sadness that these attitudes and this sort of behaviour still exists this far in the future, and even at the expense of people's own lives. They will put their own lives at risk and in danger rather than be beholden to somebody who isn't of the same caste, the same colour as them. It's a striking statement delivered very, very powerfully. So I think it's another divisive episode. People will, and have already expressed that they don't like this political side of Doctor Who. They don't like these sorts of topics being dealt with. But it's 2024. Russell T Davies, he wants to get a lot of stuff off his chest. He's back in charge of Doctor Who, that's where he's going to do it. And if you don't like it, you just got to stop watching. There's no point in complaining all the time, because this is what Doctor Who is going to be for a couple of years. 2 or 3, 4 years, however long he stays at the helm of the ship. He wants to tell more interesting stories than just monsters running through the streets and killing people. Fun as that is, and fun as that's always been, I'm sure we'll get elements of that sort of stuff, but delivered in a different way. This was a top episode. It looked great. It was really well directed. Superb performance, as I said, from Callie Cook, who really grasped this character. And I love some of the character names. I mean, these are the sort of names that only Russell could come up with. And he obviously came up with them because of the alphabetical element of the storyline. Characters like Cooper Mercy, Harry Tendency, Hoochie Pie, Valerie Nook, Blake Very Blue, Gothic Paul, Dr. P, who advises people when they need to go to the toilet, Weatherman Will, Susie Pentecost, and Brewster Cavendish. Great names, great names. He must have had a ball coming up with those names for these characters, knowing that they played into the alphabetical nature of the peril that the people of Finetime faced. So yeah, as I said, a divisive episode, one that would exasperate people who don't want Doctor Who doing politics. But you just have to accept it or move on. And it's the only message I can keep giving people. If you're not liking this iteration of Doctor Who, it is Doctor Who. Very much Doctor Who, but very much a different sort of Doctor Who. But at its core, it's still Doctor Who. People have trouble taking that on board. So I really enjoyed the episode. A funny thing, with all these episodes this year, they're not necessarily... I watched the Double Chord a couple of times, and I have seen bits of 73 Yards a couple of times, but they're not ones that you instantly rush to rewatch. So I don't know there's a massive rewatchability factor in them, because they're more about story and plot than visuals. And the visuals are great. You don't watch these episodes and think, wow, I really want to see that scene again because this visual effect was so good, or this... It's not spectacular in the way that Doctor Who often is, where you wanted to go back and see Cybermen and Daleks fighting above Canary Wharf and Jadoon stomping across the moon. It doesn't have that visual punch anymore. The punch now is very much in the scripts and the stories and the things it's saying. They aren't messages, they're just observations about the world in a sci-fi setting. And that's interesting, and that's obviously what's brought Russell T Davies back to the show, for better or for worse. So I'm going to give Dot and Bubble 8.5 out of 10, which I think is a pretty damn good score. I would love to hear what you thought of this episode. Leave a comment down below. Once again, I will say, and I say in all these Doctor Who videos, be constructive. Even if you didn't like the episode, be constructive in your commentary. Don't just write Doctor Who is shit. Don't just write Doctor Who is dead, R.I.P. Don't just write another crap episode, because I will filter out and delete those messages, so you will be wasting your time. And people have said, censorship, that's not a good look. No, it's not censorship. It's just that I want to have intelligent debate on this channel. I don't want angry nonsense posted. There are other places for that, and it's a shame I have to say this every week, but I clearly do. So yeah, leave a comment, let me know what you thought of the episode. I'd be interested in hearing some intelligent discussion about the themes, because there's lots of things. There's issues about even little touches about people's personal space and people touching one another, and do I have permission to hug you, and that sort of thing, which are things that are unfortunately part of the conversation of socializing these days. You know, how do you approach people? Do you touch people? It's all, it's a minefield these days, and these are things that the episode touched on as well. So yeah, please let me know what you thought of the episode. I'd be fascinated to hear. But as I said, do it constructively rather than destructively, because what's the point in that? Right, thank you for watching. As I've said, please like and subscribe. I'd love to get up to 700 subscribers as a base before launching upwards and onwards. So yeah, please like and subscribe. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.